Hey, I want to show y'all something. These are the weeds in my new sod in my backyard. Now I want you to be honest. Who would be freaking out right now? Well, guess what? I'm not. What's up, y'all? I appreciate you being here for another round of Budget Lawns. I've said this a bunch here on the channel that new sod does not mean nice lawn. If you've got sod, you can go ahead and expect that you are going to have weeds in it. And in some cases, a lot of weeds. And I get asked all the time, hey man, what are you going to do about the weeds in your new sod? What should I do about the weeds in my sod? And here's kind of my response to that. I'm going to start taking care of them by not even worrying about the weeds. I'm going to focus on the most important thing, and that's the grass. Okay? Weeds in new sod, sure, you can take care of them with a post-emergent herbicide. A word of caution, if you decide to do that, you better make sure that new sod is pretty darn rooted and healthy before you start putting a weed killer all over it, because that weed killer is going to stress it out. It just is. But you can use one. My personal preference is to not use a post-emergent herbicide, or a pre-emergent herbicide for that matter, in the first 12 months. In the first year of that new sod's life, I don't want to use any of that. I want it to be as organic and natural of an establishment process as possible. That's just a personal preference. That's not to say that you can't take care of the weeds much sooner rather than later, because my method does take a lot more time. So how am I taking care of the weeds in my lawn? Through the cultural practices. Our last video was all about that. I mentioned in there how just the cultural practices, mowing, watering, fertilizing, can really go so far into choking out weeds and reducing the amount you have in your yard and making them much more manageable. So I've got a lot in my yard right now. So how are those cultural practices going to help me start getting rid of them if I'm not going to use an herbicide to kill them off? Well, here's how. Okay. One, I am going to start mowing a whole lot more. I got a good mow in today. I lowered the blade a little bit. And when you lower the blade and start getting that bermudagrass cut down to where it likes to be, a lot of those weeds don't like to be cut off all the time. They want to grow. They want to get that sunlight and that heat and everything else they need to thrive. So when I keep cutting those weeds down, it's going to start making them weaker. But that bermudagrass is going to keep getting stronger. So back to what I said in the beginning, if you just focus on the grass, the byproduct of that is you'll start limiting and killing off some weeds. So I've lowered the blade on my mower just a little bit to start really getting that Bermuda on the move and growing laterally. And we finally got the weather to where I can go from once a week mows into twice a week mows. And it's going to start pushing that Bermuda a lot harder, and that will help so much. Okay? The weather has finally also cooperated to where we can get a round of fertilizer down. Finally got the first round of fertilizer in. Now I was mowing. I didn't get the front yard done today. I got the backyard done, which is really all I wanted, because this front yard, the way you see it right now, it is going to completely change. I've got big plans in the works for this, so I'm not worried about the front yard. But I did get the backyard completely mowed, trimmed, fertilizer down, and it's the middle part of May, so I'm a little bit behind on my fertilizer schedule. I threw down the 10, did not go with the organic this time, just the 10. I got it down, and then shortly after I got it down, the reason why I didn't get the front yard mowed is here comes a storm, and I just love timing my fertilizer just right to where I can get the free rain to water it in. I threw a tuna can out there in the lawn just to kind of see how much we got. Really didn't get a whole lot, maybe 1/4 of an inch. So not as much as I would typically like to water in a fertilizer, but that's a great start. We have some more rain chances tonight and more this week, so it's going to eventually get watered in. So why did I wait a little bit longer to get my first fertilization in for the year? Well, here's why. The weather was just not conducive for rapid Bermuda grass growth. We had been cool with a lot of rain, and the Bermuda just wasn't doing a whole lot. So I didn't want to get my fertilizer in towards the first part of May while the weather was like that, because really at that point, all I was going to be doing was feeding those weeds, and the Bermuda grass really wasn't going to respond much because the temps just weren't warm enough. Well, that has changed. We went from spring and we are full-blown 90s now, which is abnormally warm for this time of year, but the Bermuda grass just went bananas this past week with that. So what I'm trying to do is time that first fertilization to where the weather's cooperating. It really kicks that Bermuda into high gear, I mean overdrive almost. And with the warmer temperatures, well, guess what? A lot of those weeds that are in my backyard are cool season weeds, and they don't like these warmer temperatures anyways. So with this heat, they're going to start dying off on their own, while at the same time, the fertilizer's sending that Bermuda running. Those weeds die off, and then by the time they start disappearing, the Bermuda grass is really starting to establish and settle in. But some of those weeds, especially these field grasses, those are tough, okay? So I'm going to have to do a little bit of manual weed control myself. And to show you that I practice what I preach when it comes to not using herbicides on the new sod, I am going to be pulling a lot of these weeds that aren't the cool season ones that die off on their own in the heat. I'm going to get out here and I'm going to start pulling these field grasses and anything that I see. You know, you go out in the backyard and you pull 6 to a dozen every time you're out there. Those little baby steps start adding up and you'll see the weeds just start to disappear. So why have I not been pulling some of these weeds already? Why am I just now starting? Well, here's why. Because still, even when I pull some, that field grass is tough. The Bermuda sod had not rooted strong enough up to this point. When I was going out and pulling weeds, well, guess what was coming up with the weeds at the same time? I was just pulling chunks of Bermuda out, and pallets or squares of Bermuda sod were starting to come up as I pulled the weeds out. So I wanted to give that Bermuda even more time to root and be nice and strong and sturdy in the soil before I went out there and started pulling weeds out all over the place. And even still, pulling them out, it's causing a huge mess, but guess what? As that Bermuda starts moving and filling in, all the, bruises and scars that you see from pulling weeds, they're all going to disappear anyways. And then we're going to top dress that thing and level it. Still haven't decided. May use a little soil sand mix, maybe soil only. I don't know. It needs a lot of work. But this is how I'm tackling the weeds in my lawn. I'm just going to focus on the grass. Mow it a lot. Send it moving, choke out the weeds, fertilize it. Try to time that just right to where I'm fertilizing the grass and not a bunch of cool season weeds, because they'll die off in the heat anyways. And I'm just going to get out there and start picking the dang things. I mean, picking weeds is a guaranteed way to get it out of your lawn instantly. Just make sure when you're picking them, you're getting the roots, okay? And if for some reason you don't, and it's got a tap root and it's a little more difficult to get, who cares? Go to the next one. Again, you keep doing that a little bit at a time. In the bigger picture, it all starts to add up, and you'll start seeing the number of weeds in your new sod on the decline. If you want to use herbicides, you do you. For me, that's not my mode of action on new sod. I'm going to give that new sod time to do its thing before I try to take control of too much in it. All right, a lot of people have been asking me, hey, what are you doing about those weeds in your yard? They're bad. You see it. The new sod, it looks rough. And that's how I'm tackling it. If you want to do it another way, you do you. All right, my friends, that is it. I appreciate you joining me for another episode of Budget Lawns, and I hope to see you in the next one.